Well, another day, another WVU football roster update as 7 more names have been added to the official roster, mainly true freshmen, but we do have another transfer that we've been waiting on as well. Let's talk about it. What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Welcome back into the Country Roads webcast here for another roster update, June 30th edition. Of course, yesterday I put out the June 29th edition, and it wouldn't be, of course, later that night, West Virginia updated the roster and added 7 more names, some of them that we were talking about, hoping to see added in the near future. In yesterday's update, some of those that we were waiting on, now officially on the roster. So we'll go through and highlight all of those names. Like I said, mainly true freshman additions. Do have a couple of in here, 2 or 3 that are kind of more of the walk-on variety, but then one transfer that we've been waiting on, and there's still like 2 more names that we're waiting to finalize this roster with, but we do know that one of those is already on campus, as we mentioned in yesterday's roster update, so we're very close to this being the final edition of the West Virginia roster, which kind of aligns with the timeline that Rich Rod had talked about, wanting to have it done by July 1st. So here we are on June 30th with pretty much all the names in tow now, save for one. Technically 2, but we know one of those is there, and we'll talk about that towards the tail end. But I want to hit on these new 7 additions. I'll highlight the roster yet again. That way you guys can get a look at what you got coming at you and who you're going to see on the field in 2025 for your West Virginia Mountaineers. But before I dive in, just a quick reminder, if you would take a second out, hit that thumbs up button, help us with that YouTube algorithm, help us find more Mountaineer fans like yourself. And if you are one of those that hasn't yet, be sure to just take a second, hit that subscribe button. Doesn't cost you anything, and you'll get these videos straight into your feed. And I think these roster updates are particularly handy in today's day and age, because one thing you hear from people is, man, I never know who's going to be on the roster anymore. There's so much turnover. Well, we'll keep you up to date every step along the way. And then when Saturdays roll around in the fall, you'll know exactly who's going to be lining up, what their jersey number is going to be, what their class year is, because we've kept you up to date with it here on the Country Roads webcast. That's our goal with this roster update series that we're continuing for, was 3rd or 4th straight year now, I do believe. And ready to get to this one for June 30th. We got some really exciting names here added to the list, some talented freshmen that we're going to add here on this June 30th roster update. So I'm ready to dive in and get to it. So let's do just that. We'll go position by position again. Let's start at the wide receiver spot, where we have 2 freshmen joining the roster. All right, we'll lead off with one of those that I mentioned that was more of the PWO variety, but nonetheless, a nice add here is a freshman, Camden Pitchford. He'll be wearing number 38. 5'9", 163. He's from Columbus, Texas, and he will be a freshman here on this roster. So we'll add him at the wide receiver spot. And we will also add Tyshawn Dews, the speedy in-state receiver that we knew was on campus. We talked about that in our update on the 29th, but hadn't been added to the official roster yet. There he is. He'll be wearing number 89, listed 5'10", 171 from Hurricane there in Charleston. He joins the roster. So let's pull up the wide receiver position and update that on our CRW roster tracker now. Okay, so there you have it. Camden Pitchford and Tyshawn Dews joining Armani Weaver as the only 3 freshmen at the wide receiver position for West Virginia. Really top loaded with upperclassmen here at the wide receiver spot, but some of those young guys, I think, have a ton of potential, maybe some of the best potential in the room, particularly Cam Vaughn, who you guys have heard me rave about time and time again. And then Christian Hamilton, who came over from UNC, is a really good player as well, I think, that's got a bright future. So despite it being, top loaded with upperclassmen that are going to contribute and help you out this season, I think you do have some young guys that can help you in the future. And now you see the addition of Camden Pitchford and Tyshawn Dews to that room as you get a glimpse of the West Virginia wide receiver room there. Let's talk about the next addition. And that is the only transfer edition we have to talk about in this list, and it's Mikel Clay. We were waiting on this one. We had heard that he was on campus, much like the other player that we know is on campus that's not yet on the roster that we'll talk about towards the tail end here. But Mikel Clay, funny enough, was the first pickup West Virginia had in the post-spring transfer portal window, coming from North Alabama there. He's another senior that you're adding to that offensive line room. He'll be wearing number 79, listed 6'5", 278. Originally from Cincinnati, Ohio there, and he will be a senior this upcoming season, but he does have a redshirt year available if West Virginia would choose to use it. Like we said, coming from North Alabama there at the lower level, transferring up now. Mikel Clay joins the offensive line room, so let's take a look at that spot. All right, so Mikel Clay added into the offensive line room, which, there is another senior to add into the mix, right? Count them, 1, 2, three, four, five seniors West Virginia added via the transfer portal. Four of those being redshirt seniors, Clay being the only one still having a redshirt year available. But West Virginia went out and tried to get experienced offensive linemen, and they brought in a ton of them. And it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this competition shakes out for the starting five offensive line spots, and of course for the two deep in general. You brought in 11 or 12 transfers, I do believe, at least, that I think can, compete for those spots. You have a huge room here now with a good mix of upperclassmen down to your younger guys, some of those that we talked about yesterday. But that's the look of the offensive line room now with Mikael Clay in the fold, and that should pretty much be solidified now for the upcoming season. These are the names you'll see competing for those jobs up front. Next up, we got a couple of defensive linemen to talk about. Carter Zuliani here fits that PWO category, much like Pitchford that we talked about, but he has great size coming in as a freshman, and of course an in-state guy. You love to get those in-state guys to stay home. Coming from Bridgeport, played tight end there. We didn't know if he's been recruited as tight end or D-line. We believed it would be D-line, and that is indeed the case. Number 49 on the D-line, Carter Zuliani, 6'6", 230-pound freshman out of Bridgeport. One defensive line addition. And then I think perhaps, one of the bigger additions, we got a couple of these to talk about. We'll talk about the other one right after this because they were two of the higher-rated recruits in West Virginia's 2025 recruiting class. And one of those was Taylor Brown on the defensive line. He's someone that I think is going to have a really bright future here in Morgantown. 6'3", 275 coming in as a freshman is great size as well. Coming from Upper Marlboro, Maryland there, Wise High School. Funny thing here is they got him listed as number 51/3. So is he 51? Is he 53? Do they plan on using him on special teams as well as defense? He's going to have to switch numbers. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. I'm just going to list him as 51 on our CRW roster tracker here as we get ready to pull up the defensive line now with these two additions. But Taylor Brown is a freshman to be excited about. Let's look at the defensive line. Okay, so defensive line now with Carter Zuliani and Taylor Brown joining fellow freshmen Winterson Telemock and Brandon Caesar. There is the look of the defensive line room, and I think West Virginia has really picked up some big-time edge rushers, whether it's guys that you see here on the D-line like Jamori Robinson, Devin Grant, and Eddie Kelly, or, the bandits that we talked about in yesterday's update. I think that West Virginia should be able to pressure the passer this upcoming season, and I really like what West Virginia has on the D-line when you start to look here at the names you got to go across just, two or three positions that they'll be playing there. Jamori Robinson, one of the better players on the team, Conference USA Player of the Year last year. Eddie V's back for a final season as a graduate player. Hammond Russell's back for his final season. Alsani Redwood's back as a redshirt junior. Then you brought in Eddie Kelly. You brought in Devin Grant as well. Guys with starting potential. And then, of course, get into the lower list and you have some really young names with huge potential. Corey McIntyre Jr., probably would have started each of the last two seasons if it wasn't for injury. So I think when you look at the D-line, you have some surprising depth. And I think that's why you've heard Zach Alley kind of talk up this D-line group. And when you see it listed here, you can see why. And we got the two new freshmen now joining the fold there with Carter Zuliani and Taylor Brown. Don't sleep on Taylor Brown in the future as well. But that's the D-line room for the upcoming season. Couple more additions to talk about here. And the next one here is one of my favorite and arguably maybe my favorite addition in that 2025 recruiting class. A big-time pickup. West Virginia landed late on a flip in Dwayne Galloway, high-rated player there, 4-star recruit. Number 31 defensive back is what he'll be playing there. 6 foot 175 from Columbus, Ohio, Marion Franklin High School, and he was an absolute stud. And I think he's someone with a super bright future and someone that you need to keep an eye on in the West Virginia secondary moving forward here as we move to the future of Mountaineer football. So with his addition, let's take a look at the defensive backs again. Okay, so taking a look at the cornerback room here, Dwayne Galloway joins Kamarius Bomar, who we talked about in the previous update, is the only freshman in the room. But both of those guys, I think, have enormous potential for the future. You have a ton of seniors on the roster, as we talked about. I think it's 6 seniors in the cornerback room for the upcoming season. So those guys could be counted upon, as early as next season to really be, key players in that cornerback room. And I think they both have the potential to be able to do that. So I'm excited about them joining this room, which, yet again, as we take a look here, completely remade from last season, and rightfully so. The secondary, pass defense has been a struggle virtually over the past 2 coaching staffs, and this coaching staff's trying to rectify that. They've definitely gone out and got some big-time players to try and do so. None bigger than Michael Coach Jr., who I think is going to be an absolute stud this season, but you see a lot of names there added to the list that'll hopefully help the cornerback room this upcoming season for WVU. one more final edition to talk about here on our June 30th roster update. And that is the third of those PWO additions that I was talking about. And it's a punter, though, which we needed because we only had one on the roster currently, as Aiden Steyer, another in-state player, joins the roster right here from Morgantown High School. 6 foot, 185-pounder. So let's take a look at the special teams for the Mountaineers. Then we'll scroll through the whole roster, let you get a glimpse of it, and you could pause it on any position group if you want to look further at the 115-player roster West Virginia currently employs, which technically is actually at least 116. More on that in a moment. Okay, so there you see Aiden Steyer, the freshman, added to the punter room there, joining Oliver Straw, the senior. And you see there's the specialist for the Mountaineers this upcoming season, long snappers, punter, and kicker. And I'll scroll through the rest of the roster slowly as possible. So if you want to pause it and look at any specific position group, take a deeper look, you can. Of course, this isn't a depth chart. I do want to remind you guys of that. They're just listed from, descending order in order of grade from senior down, redshirt senior down to freshman. That's kind of the way I went about listing these positions. We will be doing depth chart updates for channel members on the channel, which shout out to our channel members. Always appreciate you guys. Help keep the mic recording and the camera rolling. And we will have those coming in the near future on there for channel members. But I will update the roster more once we get into camp and realize, break down the offensive line position by position, left tackle through right tackle. Same goes for D line with the D tackles and D ends and all of that. We'll do roster updates for that. So this won't be the last roster update before the season, but this is, pretty close to the finalized roster for the upcoming season. Like I said, 115 players for the Mountaineers, as you can have those ones, kind of grandfathered in before you eventually have to get down to the 105 roster limit over the next couple of seasons, I do believe. So we expected West Virginia to be around 115, 120 this year, and looks like right where they're going to be. And, kind of solidifying the roster just before July, as you see all of these names. But there is at least one more that we can talk about that will be on that roster. Just hasn't yet been added to the official roster, but we know he's there. We talked about it on our July 29th update, and that's Jeffrey Weimer, the wide receiver transfer. So we'll add at least one more name there. And then the other signing that has yet to make it is Julian Horton, a defensive back that flipped from, I believe, North Carolina on signing day. He's not yet on the official roster, so really he's the only holdout. So we know we're at 116 with Jeff Weimer, just waiting on him to be added to the official roster, and then we'll add him here on our CRW roster tracker, and then we'll see what happens if Julian Horton ends up coming or not. We know we did have to, deter some other freshmen from coming, and they ended up going other places, and we've talked about them in the past in live streams, but that's it, man. That's the 115-player roster for the Mountaineers as we sit here on June 30th. And personally, I'm really excited about it. I think a lot of those position groups, we've added a lot of speed, we've added a lot of talent, we've gotten a lot deeper in areas where we needed to get deeper and try and, improve our weak areas, our weak spots. I think the big question mark still is offensive line because we just have to wait and see because it's all brand new players there. But I like a lot of the pieces they've added even at that position. But that's just my opinion. Would love to hear yours. Drop it in the comment section how you're feeling about this West Virginia roster heading into the 2025 season. Really appreciate those interactions. They help us here as we continue to try and grow the CRW community throughout Mountaineer Nation. And another way you can help that just really quickly is just by taking your thumb or your mouse, whatever you're using there, scrolling over, hitting that thumbs up button here on the YouTube video. That helps a ton with that crazy YouTube algorithm. And be sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't already to stay up to date on the West Virginia football roster and all other WVU football news. We'll try and keep you up to date on here on the CRW. But that'll pretty much do it for this June 30th roster update. Like I said, more coming as we get closer to fall camp and into the start of the season there. We will have at least a couple more roster updates before we lead into our depth chart updates once the season rolls around. But been a lot of fun tracking this thing, especially this year with so much roster overhaul. It's almost completely different, and good way to keep up with it here is with us at the CRW. So that way you know who a lot of these new faces are going to be when you see them in the fall. But really appreciate you guys for checking this one out. I'll catch you next time. Let's go Mountaineers.